Van ran through the long office corridor, her heels clicking loudly against the floor, echoing her bag kept slipping from her shoulder. She did not stop to fix it. Why today? She muttered under her. Almost after 4 days, I had to be late to tell my scary boss with my life. She finally reached her desk, placing her bag down with a soft thud, bending her slightly as she tried to catch her rose and fell quickly. Strands of hair sticking to her forehead. Miss Van, the voice came from behind her and time rose slowly, very slowly. She turned around. Jungkook stood there, tall and calm, his sharp eyes already on her. His hands were in his pockets, expression unreadable, but his presence alone was enough to make her nervous. I see you have decided to join us today, he said, his voice low, almost calmer. Miles followed. Sir, late again, he took a step closer. Each step felt like pressure on her. I'm sorry, sir. Traffic doesn't explain everything, Miss Ryan. Jungkook cut her off smoothly. Or should I start adjusting your salary based on your traffic issues? Her eyes widened. No, sir, please, it will not happen again. He stared at her for a moment, silent, observing. Then unexpectedly his gaze dropped to her face, slightly longer than necessary. Her messy hair, her flushed cheeks, the way she... A faint sweet tug at the corner of his... You look like, you look like you run a marathon, he said, one blink confused at the sudden shift in tone. I kind of did, sir. For a second there was silence, then he leaned in slightly, just enough for his voice to lower. Next time leave earlier. His voice was softer now, but it carried something else. Everything that made her heart beat quicken for a different reason. Before she could respond, he straightened up. My office in 5 minutes, don't be late for that too. And just like that, he turned and walked away. One stood there, still frozen. I survived, she whispered to us, placing a hand on her. But in reality, his office in 5 minutes. She grabbed her files in again. Okay, Van, today is definitely not your day. The moment Van stepped into his cabin, the air felt different, quieter, heavier. Jungkook sat behind his desk, sleeves slightly rolled up, tie loosened enough to make him look effortlessly handsome. The soft light from the window fell on his face, highlighting his sharp features. Van swallowed. Why does he look this good while being this scary? She quickly looked away and stepped forward, placing the file carefully on his desk. Sir, can check it once. Jungkook did not respond immediately. He picked up the file slowly, flipping it open with calm precision. Silence filled the room, only the sound of pages turning and one heartbeat. His eyes scanned each line, and then his eyebrow lifted once, then again. One's finger tightened together. That's not a good sign. He closed the file with a soft but firm thud and placed it back on the table. Then he leaned back in his chair, letting out a slow sigh. Miss Van, her spine straightened instantly. Yes, sir. He tapped the file lightly. Is this your work? Her voice came out smaller than she intended. Yes, sir. He tightened his head, slightly studying her face. Interesting, of course, because I'm trying to understand how one person managed to make a mistake in such a small file. Her head. I'll correct it, sir. I must have rushed. You must have. He repeated, his tone calm but sharp. He leaned forward now, resting his elbow on the desk. Do you know what happened if I present this to a client? She shook her head slowly. We lose them. The words were simple but heavy. Silence fell again. One lowered her gaze. I'm sorry, sir. Jungkook watched her for a moment. Her nerve was fighting. The way she avoided eye contact. The sigh slightly in her trembled. Look at me. His eyes slowly lifted. He held her gaze this time steady and you are not careless, he said quietly, so don't work like you are. She blinked surprised. I don't like repeating on myself, he continued, his voice firm again. Fix every single mistake, take your time this time, a small pause, and bring it back to me. One nodded it quickly. Yes, sir, I will. She reached for the file but just as her fingers Jungkook's hand moved fast. Their fingers pressed just for a second, but it was enough. Jungkook went froze, pulling her back instantly, like she had been. Jungkook gazed flicker just like it, then he let go of the file. Go, he said quietly. Wan nodded again, almost too quickly, and turned around, practically running out of the cabin. The door closed behind her. Her silence misunderstood. Jungkook leaned back in his chair again, his eyes drifting to the door. Just existed room. A fence would appear on his messy work, he murmured to himself. Then his gaze dark, slightly, but I it. One step out of the bathroom, still clinging to her, a towel loosely wrapped around her. A damp hair fell over her shoulder as she walked toward the mirror. The soft yellow light made everything feel calmer, slower. She stared at her. She started her skincare routine, gently applying cream to her face, putting it in with a care. For once there was no rushing, no pressure, just her and the silence. When there she was, she looked at herself in the mirror. Then a small smile appeared on her eyes and she murmured, tightening her head like, "You actually look good today." A playful, slightly mischievous idea then survived a small. She grabbed her phone from the counter, rested for just a second. Her towel dropped with a confident little grin. She clicked a few pictures, just enough to capture how she felt in that moment. She checked them and her smile widened. Okay, now she spoke clearly impressed with herself. You look so. There was no one else there, just her. After a moment, she shook her head, laughing softly at her own behavior. Enough, fine, don't get too full of yourself. She slipped into her comfortable night dress, tied her into close one, and walked to her bed as she pulling the blanket over herself. The event of the day slowly replayed in her mind. Her smile faded a little, replaced by something softer, Jungkook. His voice, his gaze, the way he said, "You are not careless." Her fingers tightened lightly on the shoulder. Why does he talk like this? She whispered to herself. Her heartbeat became just a little. Shaking her head, she turned to the other side, trying to push the thoughts away. But even as her eyes closed, her face is filled with the next day felt heavier for one. Maybe it was a lack of, or maybe it was the thought of facing him again. She stood inside the Jungkook cabin, holding a two file close to her dressing. Jungkook looked up briefly, then picked up the first one, the one he had asked her to correct. He flipped through the pages line by line. His expression didn't change, but his eyes softened just a little. No mistake, clean, precise, careful, so she can do it properly, he thought. He closed the file and placed it aside, then picked up the second one. His eyes scanned the page, then the second, and just like yesterday, his first very read. Mistake again, a lot of them, almost afraid, almost amused, left him as he thought. This little one closed, he closed the file and tapped it lightly against the desk before placing it down, corrected. His voice was calm, simple, like he expected nothing else. One immediately nodded. Okay, sir. She reached for the file again, but this time she didn't rush. She just quickly took it, holding carefully. Jungkook leaned back in his chair, his gaze following her every move. There was something about her, something oddly familiar, not to her, but to him. His mind drifted back. The search, the screech of tires, the crowd, his mother frozen in the middle of the road, and then he, running forward without thinking, pulling his mother. He still remembered the way she looked at that day. But brave, she had not even stayed to be thanked, did not even look back, and now she stood in front of him, completely unaware. He still remembered the day she looked at Then again back to his usual composure. Miss Fine, she looked up instantly. Yes, sir. Don't make me repeat the same instruction again and again. His tone was not harsh, but it carried weight. I'm not right, sir, she said quickly. There was a small pause, then unexpectedly you did well on the first five. Her eyes widened slightly. It was not praise coming, but coming from him, it felt like a one. Thank you, sir, she said softly. Jungkook gave a small note, picking up another document as if the conversation was over. Go. Vine turned to leave, but this time her steps were slower. As she reached the door, she paused for just a second, glancing back at him. He was already focused on his work again, serious distance, untouchable. She quietly slipped out of the cabin. The door clicked shut. Inside, Jungkook stopped reading. His eyes moved toward the closed door. Still the same, he murmured under his. But there was something different in his gaze now. Something far more personal than just a word. Looking at his employee. Once stood outside Jungkook's cabin, holding the corrected file like it was something of precious. She had to check it once, twice, 10 times, every time. Like every number, every line perfect. Because she had to because she wanted to hear it again. That one word Snow can step inside. Jungkook did not look up immediately. What is it? Oh, sir, the corrected file. He took it from her, flipping through the pages with his usual calm focus. Van's face lit up instantly, a wide, uncontrollable smile spreading across her. Thank you, sir, she said, trying to sound calm, but the happiness was obvious. Jungkook glanced at her briefly, noticing the way her eyes sparkled something over, over something so small, something in his shifted, but he said nothing, just nodded, dismissing her like always. Still, his gaze followed her as she left. 2 months later, it was not sudden. It turned her all at once. It grew slowly, quietly, in the way his voice softened, sometimes when he spoke only to her, in the way his eyes just sank longer than needed, in the rare small places that meant more than they should. One had fallen for him, even though he was still strict, still cold, so everyone with her. There was something different, and that difference became her. Inside Jungkook's cabin, he stood outside his desk, slightly leaning against it, explaining in the file. His voice was low, control has always here. He pointed at a section. This needs to be more precise. Glance honors except words. The door suddenly opened. Both of them looked up. A woman stepped inside. She looked around Juan's age, confident, beautiful, familiar. Before Juan could process anything, the woman walked straight to Jungkook and wrapped her arms around him. Took you long enough to miss me, huh? Juan cocked, her fingers tightened around the file she was holding, and then Jungkook hugged her back, not just her. That he smiled, a real one, something Juan had barely seen. Era, he said, his was softer than usual. When did you come? That this evening, she replied, pulling back, but still holding him. Jungkook nodded, still smiling faintly. Juan felt something inside her, crack, not loudly, but enough to. She looked down, forcing her expression to stay normal, even as her heart trembled slightly. Jacob glanced at Vine. We'll discuss this later, he said, his tone back to professional. You can go now. Vine nodded quickly. Yes, sir. Her voice almost betrayed her. She turned immediately, not trusting herself to stay even a second longer. She stepped toward the door, felt heavier. Her vision blurred slightly, but she blinked quickly, refusing to let the tears fall here. Not in front of him, not in front of her. She stepped out of the cabin, the door closing softly behind her, and in that moment it did. Her composure broke. She walked faster, almost rushing to the washroom, her hand covering her mouth to stop any sound from escaping her. Inside, she locked the door and leaned against it. Her eyes filled instantly. Why does it? She whispered, her voice shaking. She sat down slowly, hugging herself because for the first time it felt like she had no place in his world. Van stood in Jungkook's cabin again, handing him the file with a steady hand. He checked it like always, focused, precise, good. The same word, the same tone, but this time nothing lit up inside her. No smile, no sparkle in her eyes. Just a small note. Okay, sir. She took the file back and walked out quietly. Jungkook stayed on her longer than usual. Something was off. She did not look at him even once. Vine sat on the floor beside her bed, a half-open bottle of in her hand. She was not used to her toddler's was over, but tonight she did not stop. One glass turned into two, ten more. Her cheeks flushed, her thoughts messy, emotion, feelings spilling out without control. So stupid, she mumbled, her voice shaky. Why do I even care? By the time the bottle was empty, she could barely see straight. She dragged herself onto the bed, falling on it carelessly, styling the ceiling. Her phone suddenly rang. That loud sound made her flinch. She turned her head slightly, squinting at the screen. Jungkook, his phone. Her vision blurred instantly as the tears filled her eyes. Why is he calling? She whispered. She picked up the call, bringing the phone to her ear. Hello? Her voice was a soft, broken. On the other side, Jungkook's voice was as calm as ever. One send me the PDF of the file I told you to complete. I need it right now. One sniffed, quickly wiping her tears with the back of her hand, trying to sound normal. Okay, boss. She hung up and fumbled with her phone and her fingers clumsily as she searched for the file. After a few tries, she managed to find the PDF. But in her haze, her gallery, the pictures and sand. She did not notice, did not realize. Her phone slipped from her hand as she turned into her side, completely exhausted. Within seconds, she passed out. Meanwhile, Jungkook, he opened the messages, expecting to find the PDF was there, but right below it, more photos, more files. His brows furrowed slightly as he tapped on one, and then he froze. The screen hit his face. Silence filled the room. What the? He mumbled under his, but his eyes didn't move, not immediately. The room had gone completely silent. His eyes stayed on the screen longer than they should have. What is she doing? He murmured under his voice low. This was not helping, not at all, because the truth he had been ignoring for months now stood right in front of him. He loved, and seeing those pictures only made it stay in him. He leaned back, closing his eyes for a moment, exhaling slowly. Get a grip, Jungkook. Wan stood outside the cabin, her heart racing uncontrollably. She could not remember Emily clearly from a nostalgic fragment, but something felt wrong very wrong. She knocked lightly and stepped inside. Sorry. Her words got stuck in her throat. Jungkook was already looking at her, not like a usual. His gaze was heavier, instant, unreadable, but tightened. Close the door, he said quietly. One hesitated for a second, then obeyed. A soft click of the door echoed in the room. Silence. Then Jacob picked up his phone and placed it on the table, sliding it slightly toward her. Get to explain this. One phone sideways, table closer, and then she saw her stop. Her face drained of color. Those pictures, her fingers trembled and stared at the screen. Her voice, her eyes filled with the tears after pure embarrassment. I'm sorry, sir. I didn't do it on a purpose. She felt humiliated, exposed, but more than that, terrified of what he must think of her now. Her trembled, and before she could stop herself, the words devoured soft, broken, but clear Jungkook expression still. Once with her eyes shut, tears falling down. I know I should not. I know you probably think I'm shameless after this. Her voice shook barely. I cannot help it. And that yesterday moment, silence filled the room. Heavy, thick. Then suddenly a slow tickle escaped me. One froze, slowly opening her eyes in confusion. Jungkook stood up and walked toward her step by step until he was right in front of her. Before she could react, he said gently held her, pulling her closer. You confess like this, he said, amused. Her breath his. One blink completely lost what Jungkook sighed lightly, his expression softening in a way she had never seen before. Era, he said, watching the direction, is my uncle daughter. Recalling, basically my sister. One I swatted. What? He nodded, a faint smile on his face, so he can stop overthinking. Everything inside her lens did all the from yesterday to gone in a second. Displaced with a belief, you're not. Jungkook looked at her for a moment, then spoke quietly. Her heart skipped. Actually, he added at his tone after. Jungkook looked at her for a moment, and you just took your time catching up. A small shaky laugh at her, and without thinking, she stepped closer, hugging him tightly. Jungkook paused for a split second. Then his arms wrapped around her chest as a family, like he had been waiting for this. One beside him, her head resting against his, listening to his steady heartbeat. His arm wrapped around her, holding her close. No, no confusion, just calm. Jungkook looked down at her, brushing a strand of hair from her face. You are still careless sometimes. My wife smiles at you, but one smile apparently against him only sometimes. He hugged, but you are mine now. His finger tightened slightly on his shirt. She did not look right. She did not need to because for the first time everything felt right.